For the next part, we will continue with a conflict zone in cooperation with DW. And it is my pleasure that for the second time we are able to do this cooperation at the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum, a special edition of Conflict Zone with presenter Tim Sebastian, which will be broadcast tomorrow at 8:30 Berlin time. And it's my pleasure that we have Ibrahim Kalin with us. He's presidential spokesperson and advisor to the President of the Republic of Turkey. Tim Sebastian and Mr. Kalin will have a 25 minutes interview, and afterwards you will have the chance for about 50 minutes to ask your questions to Mr. Kalin. Let me thank again DW for this great cooperation, and with this the broadcast can begin. I'll leave you the stage. Thank you.
Where do I sit? Here?
Over there,
here?
please.
Yeah?
Over there, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Ibrahim Kalin, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you.
Let's start with Mr. Erdogan's trip to Washington a couple of weeks ago. He went to change minds, to change influential minds in the United States, to talk about the justification for your military action in Syria, but he appears to have failed to change those minds comprehensively. Why did that happen, do you think?
Well, for us, the visit went well, actually. We have good relationship with the Trump administration. Some people at the Congress, obviously.
With Trump rather than the administration, yeah?
Well, if you want to make that distinction, that's for domestic American politics to comment about. But obviously, some people in the Congress have a different view.
The ones he hoped to influence had a different view.
Yeah, and our president made a very clear case, actually, for why we went in there. Because our goal has been to clear our border with Syria from more terrorist elements, from whether ISIS or PKK-related groups.
But they weren't buying it, were they?
Well, I think they're mistaken.
Leading members of the Republican Party, Senator Lindsey Graham, for instance, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he seems to have particularly angered your president by talking about the military action as an invasion. But what did you expect?
Well, he got his answer, obviously. Our president told him very clearly that he cannot call Turkey an invader. But
the president also got his answer, didn't he? He said the reason it's an invasion, this is Lindsey Graham, the reason it's an invasion is that's exactly what you did. I warned you not to do it, and everything that I was worried about came true in spades.
Well, it is Senator Graham who said a couple of years ago to Ash Carter, then the defense minister of the United States, that PKK is the same as PYD-YPG. PYD-YPG in Syria is the PKK. He's the one. He said this on record. Now he's changed his position. It's not for me to comment on his flip-flopping on these issues, but we have had a very clear policy line on this issue. We do not want to see any terrorist element taking over a piece of land, ruling over people in Syria, whether by PKK or ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any other groups.
Yeah, but according to the Pentagon, that's exactly the effect of what you've done. The Pentagon said just a week ago, quoting information from the Defense Intelligence Agency, the terrorist organization, they're talking about ISIS, exploited the Turkish incursion and movement of US forces to reconstitute capabilities and resources within Syria and strengthen its ability to plan attacks abroad. That's exactly what you didn't want to happen, isn't it?
Well, to the contrary, actually, it was PYD-YPG in Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain that released about 800 ISIS terrorists in prison. When President Trump spoke to our president about, so what Turkey is going to do about the ISIS prisoners, and our president said very clearly on that phone call that we will take care of them. That is, we will keep them locked up. We will not release them. We will try them. We will try to return them to their countries of origin. And this is what we did. But it was YPG, PYD that released them from a prison in Ras Al Ain. They know this. That's on the record.
Eminently foreseaable that that would happen.
Why will they do that?
And this
why
is the
did,
result.
Why did YPG
and this is
do
the result.
that? But why did YPG do that? For the
you
very
asked the
clear...
question.
Well,
what's the answer?
The answer is that PYD, YPG wants to use ISIS actually as a bargaining chip in the eyes of the West, telling them that, without PYD, YPG, the fight against ISIS will be unsuccessful. They need PYD, YPG on the ground to fight ISIS. And we have argued to the contrary from the very beginning. You cannot fight one terrorist organization with another one. You cannot fight ISIS with the PKK.
But if the effect is that 6 months down the line, ISIS in a much stronger position, what are you going to do? Just say sorry for your military action?
We fought against ISIS in the Jarablus El Bab area with the Euphrates Shield operation. We have eliminated more than 3,000 ISIS terrorists. We have about 1,200 ISIS prisoners in Turkey. More than half of them are international citizens. Some are Turkish. We are keeping them in prison. We are not releasing them. We are going after all ISIS elements. If you look at the Turkish-Syrian border, which is about 911 kilometers, all the way from Idlib to the Iraqi border, there is not a single ISIS element present in that strip of land. We have cleared our border from the ISIS. In fact, we made this case to President Obama before he decided, or when he decided to support PYD-YPG in the fight against ISIS. We told them, look, you don't need PYD to fight against ISIS. We can do this with the national elements in Syria. We can do it with the Turkish army.
Okay.
We don't need to have US troops on the ground, but you can provide air support, and we can take care of ISIS. They didn't listen.
Callan, let me just go back to your justification for this operation, that you have a right to make your border area safe from terrorism, to force militant Kurdish groups, PYD, YPG, out of this so-called terror corridor. But very few countries are buying this line. And if the job of a presidential spokesman is to sell the president's line, you're not having much success, are you?
Well,
You look at the US, Ambassador James Jeffrey, the State Department's point man on Syria. He said Turkey launched this operation despite our objections, undermining the ISIS campaign, risking endangering and displacing civilians, destroying civilian infrastructure, and threatening the security of the area. That's not much of an accolade, is it?
none of that happened, actually. They claim,
So he doesn't know what he's talking about.
well, that's not what he told us in our meetings. I've had many meetings with Jim. He's a good friend. And of course, as professionals, we work on these issues together.
He may be a good friend personally, he's not a great friend
none
to
of
the
those
operation
claims
that you
actually came true. If you look at, they said that there will be a huge humanitarian crisis with the Turkish military operation. It didn't happen. People went back to their homes. They said that Kurds will be attacked. No Kurds were attacked except PYD, YPG terrorists on the ground. They said Christian minorities will be oppressed or killed. None of that happened. In fact, it was our military that repaired just recently an Armenian church in Ras Al Ain. Now they're worshiping peacefully in Ras Al Ain. I'm talking about the Armenian church there. So all these things that they claim, none of that happened.
Violations that they said would happen and have happened, haven't they?
Where? Where exactly? Give me some examples.
Ambassador
I'll be happy
Jeffrey,
to respond.
Ambassador Jeffrey again gave you examples. He said, we would say that Turkish-supported Syrian opposition forces who were under general Turkish command in at least one instance did carry out a war crime, and we've demanded an explanation. You claimed a number of investigations were underway into human rights abuses. So you're asking me about something you already know. How many investigations, by the way, and by whom?
A number of investigations by our military have been launched.
How many, Mr. Callan? How many?
Some of them are operational details. I would rather not share them.
You can tell me if there are any human rights
probably you will find out
going on.
As a good journalist,
you don't know,
you can search and
you don't know.
find.
It's just a blanket excuse, isn't it?
Look, if you look at the civilian casualties in the Syrian war, can you guess how many civilians have died in the operation in Raqqa? Make a guess.
We're not talking about.
No, you're talking about Syria. You're talking about Syrian civilian casualties. We are talking about human rights violations. Around 3,000 civilian people died in Raqqa. The city of Raqqa was destroyed, leveled to the ground. Around 1,000 people, civilians, were killed in Deir ez-Zor. And in Mosul, again in the fight against ISIS. If we're going to talk about all this, I think we should be very candid and clear about these issues. Anywhere
it would be nice to be
9 to
11,000 you're very
civilians
vague
were
about
killed.
human rights investigations.
9 to 11 civilians were killed in the fight against ISIS in Mosul alone. How many civilians have been killed in our operation?
Mr. Callan, you don't have a great record on investigating human rights violations, do you? So why should things be different now? In 2016, the UN Committee Against Torture cited credible reports of Turkish law enforcement officials engaging in torture and ill treatment of detainees. The committee said it was concerned at the reported impunity enjoyed by those who committed such acts. Impunity doesn't suggest you were doing much investigation into those things, does it?
We have a zero tolerance policy towards torture. We have, in fact, cleared our prisons, our judicial system from torture. We've had this in the past. But what you're referring to is what happened right after the bloody coup attempt on July 15, 2016, when the FETÖ terrorists carried out a coup attempt in Turkey, killing 251 people.
It doesn't
one
license you to torture people.
I didn't say there is torture. I'm not saying this to justify. I'm referring to those who made those claims, who were actually behind this coup attempt, killing 251 people, injuring around 1,200 people. They had the intent to kill the elected president of Turkey.
The reports, Mr. Callan, go on and on. 2 years ago, the NGO Freedom from Torture said that from 2011 to 2016, all the years when Mr. Erdogan and the AKP have been in power, Turkey was one of the top 10 countries for referrals after torture. And in 2016, you moved into the top 5. No known investigations were ever carried out.
The number of investigations have been carried out.
How many?
As I said, we have...
How many and by whom?
You want me to say 20, 30, 40?
Well,
I can give
is
you
that
the
what
full,
you
full
want to say?
details.
I'd like the truth.
I will be happy
I'd like
to give
the
you
truth.
the exact numbers. I don't have the reports with me. I'll be happy to send them to you.
In 2017, the Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights said the problem of effective investigations and impunity of security forces is a very long-standing and entrenched problem in Turkey. So you're not fooling anyone, are you?
No,
With this talk of
we are not in the
investigations.
business of fooling anyone. We are taking care of our own national security. When you face this kind of credible national security threats against the PKK or from the PKK, from ISIS terrorists, from FETÖ terrorists, those terrorist organizations, the West only recognizes one of them. That is ISIS, because it attacks Western interests. But the others, since they are only in Turkey and attacking Turkey, the elected government, the security forces, or the civilians, nobody wants to talk about it.
Mr. Callan, you sent in last month, you sent in your Syrian proxy forces into the northeast corridor of the country, knowing that in all likelihood they would torture, abuse, and possibly murder people, because that's exactly what they had done in the northern city of Afrin, which you seized in 2018, isn't it?
Not at all.
In
fact, it
August
was
that
the
year,
same
Amnesty
people-
International reported you gave free rein to Syrian groups armed by you to commit serious human rights abuses in Afrin.
That didn't happen in Afrin. There was looting in Afrin, and they were penalized. But it's the same group. By the way, we are talking about the Syrians themselves fighting for their own freedom, for their own country, against the brutality of the Assad regime, to which the Western world has now turned a blind eye. We are the only ones actually taking care of millions of refugees and Assyrians in both Turkey and on the Syrian side. It's the same Syrian National Army which the Americans supported or promised to support 5 years ago, 6 years ago. They changed their policy in the course of time. It's the same Syrian people who fought against the Assad forces in the Idlib area. When they fought against Assad and ISIS in that area, everybody applauded them.
What's the situation
When
now?
they came to PYD, YPG held areas, suddenly the air changed. They said, well, they are terrorists, they are jihadists. They are the same people who fought in Idlib. Everybody is thankful to Turkey for keeping things under control in Idlib because we've prevented another major
Well, I don't see much
migration
gratitude. I don't
crisis.
see much gratitude coming your way at the moment.
You need to ask why.
What is the
We are taking care of almost 4 million Syrian refugees for the last 5 years.
I'll give you a reason.
We are
Mr.
taking
Callan.
care of another 3 to 4
You asked the
million
question, I
Syrian
was going to give you a
refugees
reason.
on the Syrian side. We are basically taking care of about 7 million Syrian refugees for the last 4 or 5 years. We are preventing another major humanitarian crisis, another migration from Idlib.
I know
So we're
that
doing more
line.
than anyone
I know
else,
that line.
actually.
We've heard that line. Do you know what the situation in Afrin is now?
It's very
a
calm.
year.
It's very calm. No, there is no
Very
ISIS.
calm. Okay.
There is no ISIS. There is no PYD there. Much of what you're
2 months
saying
ago-
is PKK propaganda.
Well, you say it's
You're
very-
listening
you say
to
it's
PKK
very calm.
people in Syria.
You say it's
the
very
reason
calm.
They
The
are
Human
upset
Rights
about
Council-
Afrin. The reason they are upset about Afrin, they lost a big chunk of land.
2 months
That's
ago,
the only reason.
2 months ago, the UN
Ask
Human
the
Rights Council.
original Kurdish
Mr.
people
Callan, you
living
can go
in
on speaking,
Afrin.
but I need to raise this
I'm the one
question.
speaking. I'm the one supposed to be
I know.
speaking here.
Yeah, but I'm the one who's asking questions.
If you ask the original Kurdish people living in Afrin, which is about 400,000, by the way, in Afrin, ask them how they are being treated now compared to how they were treated under PYD, YPG control.
2 months ago, the UN Human
You wanna
Rights
ask them that
Council.
question?
2 months ago, the UN Human Rights Office reported the situation in Afrin, contrary to your nice assurances, remained dire. Armed factions had carved up the province into zones of influence. there was repeated kidnappings, torture, extortion, and assassination. That's some legacy you left behind, isn't it?
No, look, we
Contrary
have
to your
cleared
fine
Afrin from
assurances.
PYD, YPG terrorists, which are the Marxist-Leninist leftist group, which is supported by all the freedom-loving liberal Western countries, including the Trump administration, which is really mind-boggling for me, that the United States will support a Marxist-Leninist organization in Syria in the name of fighting against ISIS.
Well, what's baffling to them is that you have your forces on the ground, according to William Roebuck, who's the top State Department official in northern Syria. Your forces have committed abuses on the ground, war crimes, and ethnic cleansing. He said on November the 7th, Turkey's military operation, spearheaded by armed Islamist groups on its payroll, represents an intention-laced effort at ethnic cleansing. It was, he added, an unprovoked military operation that at the time he spoke, November the 7th, had killed some 200 civilians and left over 100,000 people newly displaced and homeless.
We've heard this many times from the CENTCOM people within the Trump administration, which actually never got
you just
themselves reconciled with the fact that we are taking this action against their so-called allies.
You want them
which
to
is the
reconcile
PKK
with
in
ethnic
Syria.
cleansing? You want them to recognize?
They are reconciling themselves with the PKK terrorist network in Syria, giving them piece of land, and then while at the same time talking about Syria's territorial integrity or ethnic balance in Syria. How can you explain the fact that you favor one ethnic group, which is linked to a PKK terrorist network, the so-called Kurds, against all the Arab, non-Kurdish, non-PKK Syrians, the Arabs, the Christians, the Turkoman, all the other Syrians? They are coming to us, telling us the oppression that they are living under the YPG. I'll give you one specific example. When we cleared
Please,
the
briefly,
Jarablus,
because we've got a lot to get through here.
when we cleared the Jarablus Elbab area with the Euphrates Shield operation from ISIS, and there was no regime, there was no PYD there. You have these three, monsters on the ground. You have the PKK, you have ISIS,
Okay,
and
you
have
keep
the
going
Assad
on about
regime.
this, but
Look,
I need to move this on.
I'll give you
now.
one specific example.
Very
when
quickly,
we cleared this
please.
area, about 350,000 Syrians returned to their homes from Turkey. Nobody wanted to go back to regime-held areas or PYD-held areas.
right.
Why?
Mr. Callan, we've talked about some of the criticism of your actions, especially from allies, but what you really want to stamp out is criticism at home, isn't it? On October the 10th, your broadcast regulator, RT UK, warned the Turkish media not to say anything critical about your action in Turkey, that there would be, as they put it, zero tolerance of any broadcasting that might negatively impact the morale and motivation of soldiers or may mislead citizens through incomplete, falsified, or partial information that serves the aims of terror. In other words, you put out anything that the government doesn't like, and you're in deep trouble. So much for press freedom.
Well, you have
Turkey.
all kinds of freedom outlets, media outlets in Turkey. They
Man, a lot of them you've closed
on
down.
TV, on internet. You have all kinds of different views, attacking the president every single day, attacking me and us.
That's why in the first week of the offensive, you closed down 839 social media accounts for sharing, as you put it, criminal content. 186 people
they
were
were-
taken into
they were
police
cheering for
custody,
PKK.
and 24 remanded
They
in
were
pre-trial
spreading
detention.
terrorist propaganda. You wouldn't allow
You haven't
that
got
here
any
in
proof of
Germany.
that, have you?
You wouldn't allow that in the UK. When you do it in the West, it's for public order. When we do it, it's oppression.
Since the 2016 coup attempt, 180 media outlets have been forcibly closed, over 220,000 websites blocked, according to the NGO Article 19. In September, it said scores of journalists remained in jail or under travel bans. Hardly a proud record for you, is it?
Yeah, but you're dealing with PKK news outlets that is spreading propaganda for the terrorist network. When you're dealing with FETÖ terrorists that carried out that coup attempt on July 15th, yes, they had the media empire, not an outlet, a media empire in Turkey.
You fling around these
the
accusations.
FETÖ people I'm talking
You fling
about,
around these
using
accusations of
taxpayers'
terrorism.
money actually to spread their propaganda. Now, unfortunately, they have a free reign, free ride here in Western capitals. They're all over the place. According to the Germany's own Committee for the Protection of the Constitution, the presence of the PKK in Germany alone, I have the full report here, it's in German, I'm sure our German colleagues will know about this.
You won't mind
This
if
is
we
not-
don't go through it.
This is not our report, by the way. This is Germany's own unofficial report. In fact, when President Steinmeier came to Turkey when he was foreign minister about 2 years ago, I think our president presented this report to him as well. Said, look, this is your own report.
Okay,
Not
this
our
doesn't
report.
take us any further, this
Well,
line.
no, what
This
it
doesn't
says,
take us
what
any
it says
further.
is that you're giving a free ride to PKK in Germany. Why do you do that?
And as far as
We are not doing that in Turkey.
As far as the West is concerned, this was a report from a British parliamentary committee back in 2017. There is a fundamental intolerance of alternative narratives in Turkey, with the government broadly suppressing, discrediting, or punishing those who contradict its accounts of sensitive events.
Look, there are journalists who do their job. They are free to report, have critical comment. Nobody has any problem with that. There are those who spread propaganda, who use actually ID cards, press cards, but function as PKK operatives or
And those are
operatives.
people you subject to extreme conditions in your prison. Like Ahmed Şık, for instance, from Cumhuriyet newspaper.
He was
reported
released.
to have been spending
he was
time
actually
in
put
solitary
in prison
confinement.
by the Gülenists in the first place. He was put in prison by the Gülenists.
Oh, so that makes it all right now that you've kept him in prison.
No, but what I'm saying, this is the extent of the power that these people had in Turkey. We are clearing them from the media outlet, from the judiciary, from the police. For this
What do you mean you're cleaning? You don't have anything against him.
No. I'm talking about the FETÖ people that had, in fact, the judiciary, the security forces in their hands. And now we're clearing them. Most of the things that you're referring to, in fact, is a reference to these people.
I'm referring also to what the EU Commission in its latest report called the backsliding on human rights, backsliding in a number of areas affecting human rights. It says your accession negotiations have effectively come to a standstill. It's time to end this, isn't it? Because you have no intention of meeting the conditions for membership that have been set down by the EU, have you?
We were promised to be a full member in the European Union many times.
And then you violated human rights, left, right, and center.
And we've been waiting since, I don't know, 62, 63 officially. We got an official date in 2004 and 5. It was our president, President Erdogan, actually, who put so much political capital into this. And we were presented with a package of 36 chapters. No candidate member was ever presented with this many chapters. And then what happened? 15 years later, we open only one chapter, close only one chapter. I'm not even talking about
You're saying you're the victim here. You like to play the victim of what? Bias against Turkey?
I don't see myself as a victim. I'm just stating the facts. Look, there is an enlargement process or fatigue in Europe.
And there are conditions to be met.
They don't want to
And you don't meet
expand.
them, Mr. Callan.
And there
You
is a
don't meet them.
negotiation fatigue in Turkey also. How long will it take? Another century for Turkey to be a full member?
That's up to you,
It's
isn't it?
one thing
if you
after
abide by the
another.
conditions, it could happen
No,
quickly.
look, most of the
You're
things
not
that we are
interested,
talking
are you?
about, for example, in Eastern Mediterranean today, is related to the Cyprus issue. You remember what happened in 2004 with the Annan referendum? For the unification of the island, the Turkish side said yes, the Greek side said no. And what happened afterwards? In fact, the
So
EU
what do you
was,
put this down
no,
to?
What I'm
the
saying
anti-Turkish
is
chorus that you talk so much about? Is this part of the anti-Turkish chorus that you often talk about?
I'm talking about
What are you saying
a
here?
failure of consistency.
Are you saying the EU is
and
biased
principle
against Turkey?
In the EU, after the referendum, what they did, instead of actually challenging the Greek side on this issue, they accepted the Greek side as a full member. And that violated another key EU principle. You don't bring in a bilateral territorial dispute into the EU. They did exactly that. And now, for the last 14, 15 years, we've been dealing with this issue. So, my point is that it's either Cyprus or human rights issues or security or Turkey's. It's one thing after another that is presented as an excuse or an obstacle for Turkey's EU membership.
Okay, so
And
you know what the conditions are,
we
so
will
you either
never
want to meet them or
accept-
not. Call it
we-
a day then.
we will
If you're fed
never-
up with it, call it a day.
If the EU wants to do it, they're welcome to do it. We are still committed to joining the EU as a full member, nothing short of a full member.
Mr. Callan, let's just look briefly in the time we have left at the purges, the people who were after the coup attempt in 2016.
I think I already answered that.
The people who were fired from their jobs. Many thousands of them had to be cleared later on because the charges against them were nonsense, weren't they? Thousands of people who were falsely implicated in the coup attempt had to be reinstalled because the allegations against them were false. Not that they had the chance to defend themselves before they were fired. This is life under your AKP, isn't it?
All right. We
You
are in
get
Germany.
purged, you have no
Are we
chance
on
to
the eastern
defend
side or
yourself.
the western side of Berlin right now?
Does it matter?
What? On the eastern side. You know how many people were fired from their jobs when the unification happened in
We're not talking
1989?
about Germany.
No.
We're talking about.
Look, you have to see
I
this
know
in
you
context.
don't want to talk about this.
You have to
it may
see
be
this in
painful and
context.
embarrassing.
You know,
no.
when it
let's
comes
just
to
talk about
your own issues, you want to provide the context. When it comes to Turkey, you deny me the right to state the context. How many people?
It's not
were
a German
fired?
context. It's a Turkish context.
No, we are talking about the general principles of people being fired. How many people were fired? I'm asking the audience here. How many people were fired from their jobs when the unification happened in 1989? I'll give you the number. 500,000 people.
So
These
what?
are
So
civil
what?
workers, these are soldiers,
So
these
what?
are journalists, these are diplomats.
You can play the what about game, and it's very fashionable.
No,
among spokesmen
I'm
and
providing a
politicians
context
these days. What about
for
Mars?
this.
What about Venus?
I'm
what about
providing a
Russia? What
context
about China?
for
no,
what happened in
no,
Turkey.
you're
When
trying
you
to
talk about the
evade
purge,
answering the question.
it's a very
the fact is that tens
simple
of
fact.
thousands of people were fired and humiliated, and their reputations were drawn through the mud
Okay.
before finally they were able to clear their names. They'd lost
because
their
there is a
passport, they'd
judicial
lost
path
their-
for this.
Yeah, but look
There
what
is a
happened in the
committee.
meantime.
They have applied. Those who were cleared, in fact, are free either to go or to apply for their jobs. And that's still a process underway. Of course, I'm not saying that everything is perfect there. There is still room for improvement. There are still things that we need to do to make sure that these people have their full rights. But you have to see this in context.
Your party has sat back and watched countless people's lives ruined while you threw allegations at them that turned out to be false.
There is a judicial process for them to
eventually.
apply.
Eventually,
Yeah.
eventually, maybe.
There was for this 500,000
Who cares about the
people.
collateral damage?
Yeah.
huh?
There's 500,000 people who were fired from their jobs during the unification because they were suspected of working for SATSI, the Eastern German intelligence. They were
Thank you.
suspected.
But we're talking about Turkey.
We are talking
We
about
have been
people
talking about Turkey.
in Turkey
And I
that
thank you
carried
very
out
much.
a military coup.
And I thank you very much for being on Conflict Zone.
All right,
Yeah.
my pleasure.
Thank you very much.
So much to talk about.
And so little time. And so little time.
So little time.
We're going to take some questions, and we have a first question, which goes to Thomas from DW.
One of our users wanted to know about minorities in Turkey. How long do you think minorities in Turkey, in particular Armenians, Kurds, Greeks, Christians, and Jews, will have to wait to become equal to Turks in both rights and duties?
Well, give me one example where they're not equal in terms of citizenship, voting rights, education, using their language, traveling. Give me one example where a Christian is not equal, say a Christian Turkish citizen is not equal to a Kurd or Turk to me or someone else. Give me one example in terms of freedom of worship. Look, we have returned the properties of Christian minorities that were taken from them in the 1940s and 50s back to them over the last 10 years, worth, I don't know how many, $2-3 billion. You ask the Christian community in Turkey, they have freedom of worship. In fact, the Greek Orthodox Church in Istanbul, it's called the Fener Greek Orthodox Church, they had a citizenship problem. They have the synod where they have to have a certain number of people to run the affairs of the church. They were short of people. It was our president who granted citizenship to those who came from Greece, from Europe, and other places, so that they will meet the numbers. It has nothing to do with us, by the way. It's their own internal thing. So they have their own churches, they have their own schools, they have their own language, they conduct their own religious affairs on their own. We don't interfere. I meet them personally all the time. If they have any issue, just ask any one of them, the Armenian church, the Greek Orthodox church, or the Jewish community in Turkey. Ask them if they have a problem reaching us, or when they face a problem, a legal problem or social problem, political problem, that we don't attend to it. Just give me one example where someone has been denied of their rights because he is a Christian or Kurd or Jew or Armenian in Turkey. Give me one example.
Okay.
I challenge you to do that.
Let's take another question. Anybody? Gentleman over there. Yes.
Semen Alexei, National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. Thanks for quite an interesting discussion. Whether on purpose or not, it was right boxing fight. But my question is, after all your statements, Mr. Karin, do you still, Turkey, aspiring EU membership? Because according to your rhetoric, according to facts which you presented more critical on the European Union, whether you still want to be EU member under some conditions, or it's no more the question of your strategy?
Look, we are a strong ally in NATO, and I say this on purpose. I underline this a week before the NATO summit in London next week. We are preparing for that summit. We believe NATO is the most important alliance in the world right now, and we are a strong member of it. We have the second largest army in NATO. We are a part of the Western Alliance. We've been since the founding of the Republic. And we have been trying to be a full member in the European Union for the last, 50, 60 years, since 63, but the official process has begun in 2005. And we still are committed to joining the EU as a full member. But I underline, again, as I said earlier, nothing short of a full membership. For our own national interest, for Europe's security, for economic benefits that will bring, in fact, to both Turkey and the European Union, we are still providing security for Europe and for the southern flank of NATO. We are playing a very key role there. But unfortunately, because of the enlargement fatigue, because of the maybe a rise of the far-right politics and the tilting of mainstream politics to the right in Europe, and for a number of other reasons, economic reasons, other political reasons, Turkey, unfortunately, has not been accepted as a full member. As I said, we have not made as much progress as we would like to see. But if we have a new page today, we are ready to make more progress on the chapters, on streamlining and aligning our perspectives on energy security, on fighting terrorism, on immigration, on many other issues. I think we have much to gain in this partnership between Turkey and the EU. I know there are question marks about the future of the EU, the relevance of European political vision and all of that, but we believe that Europe has a role to play, and with Turkey it will be stronger, and Turkey will be stronger with EU as this umbrella identity for all.
Okay, gentleman here in the front row.
Suat Kılıklıoğlu, Center for Applied Turkey Studies at SWP. Good to see you here, Ibrahim.
See you, Suat.
I know it didn't come up in the conversation, but in many places where I attend and participate, the question of Turkey's S-400s, Turkey's relationship with Russia, how would you, in 3 sentences, explain to us the acquisition of the S-400s and Turkey's membership in NATO and its future in the Western Alliance? Thank you.
Thank you. The decision to purchase S-400 from Russia was not made overnight. We tried, our president actually spent really enormous amount of time to buy the Patriots from the United States. It didn't happen for one reason: the Congress, the Obama administration. I've been through all those negotiations for 6 years, nonstop 6 years. We tried with our own money. We wanted to buy the Patriot system. Can you imagine a country like Turkey doesn't have an air defense system? We have our own air defense system through our F-16s, but not the air defense missile system. So we wanted to buy the Patriots, okay, for a long, long time. They said the Congress will not permit for co-production, will not give the licenses for this and that. And all these negotiations failed. And then when our president said, look, we are not without alternatives. We will be looking for alternatives. The Americans didn't take us seriously. They thought we were bluffing. For 2 years, we made it clear to them, look, if you don't give us the Patriots, and we need them because the Syrian war is going on, we have threat from the Syrian regime, from Daesh, from ISIS, from other elements. We need the air defense system. They thought we were bluffing. And we've been
more than 3 sentences.
All right, well, 3 long sentences. We believe today, so let me just finish this part then, very briefly. We believe that the S-400 will not pose any threat to the F-35 program. We do not want the F-35 to be jeopardized by anything, S-400 or by any other system. The S-400s will be a standalone system. They will not be integrated into the NATO system. Therefore, the concern that the sensitive data will be stolen from the F-35 program will be addressed there. We are willing to do a very detailed technical study with our American counterparts. In fact, I've been mandated to follow this with my counterpart, Robert O'Brien. In fact, we'll be talking about this next week at the NATO summit. We believe that those concerns can be addressed. We can have the S-400.
Okay.
We want to have the Patriots, and we want to get back into the F-35 program because we believe that we see our future in the F-35 program
Okay,
rather than
let me
any
just try
other.
and get in a couple of other questions before we have to stop. The gentleman at the back.
Could you explain in your own words your political system? Do you consider yourself a democracy? And if so, what do you understand what democracy means?
We have a well-established tradition of democracy. We have free and fair elections. People attend the elections. They vote freely. We have the highest attendance levels in elections in any country in the world. In most of the Western countries, that's about 50%. Even in the US, the level of participation is about 50-55%. And you have only two political parties. Usually we have 80-85% participation by the people in the elections, with tens of political parties attending, running for posts and positions. We have different political parties from right to left. We have the secular Republican, we have the mainstream or kind of the right mainstream conservative to the far, nationalist parties, etc. So you have a hugely diverse political spectrum. You have the ballot box, and every 4 years, you go back to the people. If you're not doing well, then you are voted out.
And you've removed 24 mayors, Kurdish mayors from the southeast, despite the fact that they were duly and
We were
democratically
unfortunately
elected.
supporting the PKK with people's money.
How many were convicted of that?
Out of 20, I think the court trials are still underway.
No, there's nobody convicted. So what happened to the presumption of innocence?
Well, there is a
They're
judicial
just
process
simply
going
taken
on.
out of their jobs, removed.
They are in the judicial
You
process.
trashed the democratic process.
They will be charged.
You trashed the democratic process.
They will be charged, of course.
Well, eventually everybody would. Maybe you'll be charged too when the next government comes in. Have you thought of that? You used to work for a Gulenist newspaper.
I didn't
Zaman.
work for them. I wrote for
You wrote for them.
Yeah. There's a difference.
Are you worried about the revolving door in Turkey? That maybe
Yeah,
the
I
next
don't know.
lot comes in and
Maybe, I don't
you're
know.
caught in there.
Yeah, if 5-10 years, you think the Nazis will come to power and put you on trial here?
Ah, that's a slur. That's
what
a
you're
nasty
saying.
slur. No,
That's what you're telling me.
this goes round and round in Turkey, doesn't it?
Yeah, it may go around in other places too.
Okay. Gentleman there, I think that's probably the last question we can take.
Hello, thank you. Interesting debate here. Ricardo from Portugal, Member of Parliament. Two-part question. In terms of the refugee crisis, it is acknowledged that we need to solve the issues that are pushing refugees away from their homelands and their home regions. As a strong NATO member, as you mentioned, that Turkey is, do you believe there should be a shift in NATO's mission to also protect NATO allies' interests in the grounds where these conflicts are happening? And secondly, there has been a reinforcement of the EU-Turkey agreement for Turkey to hold back the refugees in your own country. We've heard a lot on our side of the views and many critical views of this pact, but I would be interested to hear Turkish views on that agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the refugee crisis is an international issue. Everybody should take responsibility for it. No country single-handedly can handle it. We cannot do it on our own. We are trying our best. That's why our president has called for a donors conference for help from the international community, including NATO, the European Union. We have a deal, obviously, Turkey-EU migration deal led by Chancellor Merkel. She single-handedly, led that process, and she paid a price politically here for leading that effort. But I think she did the right thing. But it's not enough, obviously. We're not talking about just money. We're talking about addressing the issue at its roots. And that's the war in Syria. Without bringing an end to the conflict in Syria, the refugee crisis will not be resolved. I mean, we can move people around, and we would like to return the refugees back to their homes in Syria once we clear those areas completely and establish the safe zones. But again, it can happen only with international cooperation. I think NATO should play a role there. EU should play a bigger role there, definitely, because we don't want these refugees to come to Europe or go anywhere else. They should go back to their homes once they feel, of course, safe, and that should be under the UN principles of safe, voluntary, and dignified return. And we are trying to provide conditions for that to happen.
All right, I'm afraid I'm being told that we have no more time left, but thank you very much indeed, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.